Let us talk, Sophia. Now the people perished for lack of wisdom, which is applied knowledge. And when you do the wordplay, you get a lot of different disturbing things like sap, and so on. Okay? So the spirit is the truth. The light temple war arch means you tap in. Tap into spiritual power. Draw on or draw in spiritual power. You tap out as a pussy for the pussies when you deny the spirit for worldly gain and pleasure. So there is the submission to God versus satanic fun and liberation, right? Liberating you from moral constraints. God's Son put a sword to your spirit and says, do you yield? Do you accept the divine order? The divine orders and the divine order, which is to follow God, follow his Son. So there's sunset cults and there's sunrise. Okay, do you look toward the sun spiritually or do you look away? So when you think about the New York, right, the York rite, I'll get into that probably in part 2 because I'm going to go through this slowly so you can understand me. All right, so think of the Spirit of God as a fire. And as you sense the warmth of the Lord, God, the true Lord of fire and not Satan, you come closer to it and you start following that warmth in the dark, so to speak. And you start walking the path toward it. And as you walk the path, you get kind of good at sensing where it is. And you get a good sense of it, and you start going toward it in a way that's consistent. And you don't get too close or overstep your bounds, or you burn, right? So the spirit of Ra, generation, success, over time as you breed in the right spirit, the spirit in which love was given, the spirit in which it's received, and the offspring, which has to do with the mountain dew, which has to do with God giving the 10 Commandments to Moses on the mountain, Mount Zion, Mount Horeb, and so on. And of course the hawk. So it is not Judah Knight or Jedi Knight, but Judah the Son, which is also the difference between Luke Skywalker and another Jedi Knight. Who do you look to as the hero? All right. Now, let's remove all arrogance from the situation, as I try to time and time again. The circumstances of my life have made it so that it is hard for people to believe my story when I tell them the absolute truth for obvious reasons. So let's go back to the drawing board here. The God of Israel spoke. The rock of Israel said to me, when one rules over men in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God, he is like the light of morning at sunrise, on a cloudless morning, like the brightness after rain that brings the grass from the earth. Okay, it has to do with fertility, Osiris is green, and so on, right? It also has to do with the Pharisees, right? Who are the Pharisees? Pharaoh, Pharisees, Pharisees, right? They're like illegitimate representatives of the Pharaoh who rejected the capstone, the stone the builders rejected. And they're supposed to build on the righteousness, the righteous generations of the past in a descending order. And he was before Abraham in more than one sense. Before Abraham, I am. Just like before David, right, there was Jesse and Obed, which also can be seen as a play on words for the son generation, the bed. Okay. I went through David's mighty men, Josh-eb, Basebeth, where the Septuagint says Baal. Of course, Baal or Baal is the demon trying to pose as God, trying to sit in as God, the storm god, the Canaanite pagan god. Okay. So when you look at Siva, for example, Shiva, which is also said Siva, for example, red rum, murder, backwards. There's a lot of this wordplay in society. This is an example of the H, the fence being removed. Shiva or Siva. The god of destroyer, that's a destroyer, and a god of regeneration. Okay, there's Vishnu, the preserver, and Brahma, the creator. This is the trinity of the Indians. So there's different trinities in different places. Okay, there's the Palmarian Trinity of the Roman Empire. There's the Babylonian Trinity, which is pretty much the same, with different words, from what I gather. And then there's the Indian Trinity. There's the Trinity of the Church, and so on. And why is there a Trinity in the first place? Well, when it's more complicated than that, well, it certainly has to do with the 3 points of the triangle and the capstone, and which face is it, right? So there's probably maybe 4 major trinities for each side of the pyramid is one way to look at it, and there can only be one that is correct. Just like inevitably, when you have 4 different arguments, one of them is the closest to the truth. Okay, so a lot of people explain it as it's somewhere in between, but not necessarily. Okay, if I strike someone down and there's a bunch of people arguing that this guy won, it was a tie, and someone says he struck him down, is the truth somewhere in between? No. And when it comes to God, it's the same. When a prophet says one thing and a false prophet says another, and a scientist says another, which one's the truth, right? So I went over the Phoenix, Phoenicia, Pawn E, CIA, right? See the I of the A, Pawn E, why the Phoenicians aren't the people who are associated with the Sun Temple of Ra at Heliopolis, the cult center. It was actually basically the ancient people who were the most like the Igbos and relatives of the Igbos, and certainly some of them were Igbos, and they were most expressed through the Igbo tribe. And this is key, because it goes back to my argument before. There's one culture that is the most accurate to the truth, that is the closest to the truth. And we have to separate ourselves from who we are to get to that culture. Because even within that culture, there are subcultures. So within any given culture, there is one perspective that is the closest to the truth. And within all cultures, there's one culture that's the closest, generally speaking, and there's that subculture perspective that is the closest. It kind of pinpoints it. It's like everyone's throwing darts, and one of them got the closest, right? Okay. So we look at the Indian cattle, right? The cowboys, they're breeding Indian cattle, and that has to do with this as well. Yoga philosophy, Yogi Bear, right? I wear that Kali hat. I don't follow yoga, I don't follow Indian philosophy. I don't follow Kali, okay? Who has blood on her tongue, her hands, and so on, right? She eats the young, she kills people. She's like a bloodthirsty beast, and her cult can be seen as people who take away wanderers to help preserve the Indian perspective. And one of those guys, I think it was Vishnu, is the preserver, right? Regeneration, destroyer, preserver, all these Indian deities work together to maintain the traditionalism of Indians. And of course, if you know Indian women, for example, they tend to be very traditionalist, Indian people in general. Okay, and even though they're involved with the liberals, they might sleep around when they're younger and eventually marry an Indian when they're older. This stuff just needs to be explained. Okay, so I went over agologist in the last video, a sexual sadist, Marquis de Sade, Smuggled Sade. Rich people kill themselves when they become poor. What does that tell you about, how they see the world? They themselves say, "Give me liberty or give me death." Give me true freedom, or don't treat me like a slave. Don't treat me like, a non-white in America during slavery. Don't treat me like a poor debt slave. And they kill themselves typically when they lose everything. So the worst part of slavery is sexual slavery. Do I need to explain that? Christianity based on Egyptian martial arts morality, true or not, was used in Rome to neutralize. Okay, basically in Rome, the absence of a black African martial arts perspective, martial arts being the wrong word, but it's the right word as far as people's basic understanding, but the hidden meaning of it is delusion, delusion, and trickery. So you can go back to the deluge and so on. So when I say martial artist, unless I'm using it in the terms of trickery, I mean light tempo war arts. I mean war in its greatest perspective, moving in the spirit of and winning in war, moving in the spirit of love and winning in love. And so nature, the supernatural, right? It can be seen as technology versus super government technology, right? So naturally, if you lose to a natural spirit in the supernatural, in the spiritual realm, it's not looking good for you. So it doesn't pay to make enemies with those people of whatever race who move in the spirit, who are right with God. And you do them wrong, you do the poor wrong, you do the immigrants wrong, you do the innocent people wrong, you're gonna suffer. There are people like me who die trying to defend these people. And yes, we are waiting for you in the spiritual realm with all due respect and everything else. All right. So their potential allies like Buddhism, Buddha, or Cupid are similar. Okay, by separating these African martial arts using sports and sports form of martial arts, especially MMA, when it is dishonorable, immature, and high society, women don't date them. So women in high society, high sadidi women, sade, right, sadism, high sadidi, they don't date MMA fighters. They don't date ruffians. They see themselves as above, right? What is the most tantalizing thing in Western culture, in mainstream Western culture? It is a princess or something like that. She's not only beautiful, she's pure. She has the best of everything. She's getting herself all done up, beautiful, and so on. And you like, I really want to feel that, right? What is, with all due respect, what is a vagina? What is a pussy, right? Pussy, cat, hit the cat, let me hit it, hit them skins and so on, right? It is something smooth and soft, right? And what is a princess? How is she portrayed? I think you get it, okay? Silky smooth, the silk trade in India and so on, right? Okay, so going on, you have these weird Hollywood Crowley sluts, whoever they may be, that are willing to date these people because they're kind of like the trash that are presented to us. But when we use our heads, we know these are the sluts who do sex scenes, and princesses and stuff are above that, right? They're above that. Okay, so Crowley, sluts, and so on. Okay? Rounds, they hold the round in between the rounds at boxing and MMA fights. Round two, right? Those bikini wearing, bathing suit or whatever. Okay. So Buddhist monks, right? Shaolin Buddhists separate the monks from society. They pick the best fighters. And ultimately, if I'm not mistaken, this means they're screening out the genes of the greatest warriors, showing their allegiance to the global New World Order system. The Indian have the strong men, right? They're not focusing on agility, footwork, speed, sparring. They're focusing on strength, and they're breeding in that direction, showing their allegiance to the New World Order, which is ultimately is to Northern Europeans, Rome, etc., the British. American systems not used by military. Okay, so the arts that are effective, we have created warfare in terms of favoring the Nordic type, and perhaps the Mediterranean, just white people, kind of stocky people, small, medium, and large, short, medium, and tall. Okay, carry a lot of gear. If you're a quick moving martial artist, you don't want to be weighed down. Your back, you're not like a pack mule or something. I think we all get that. Okay, and of course, I'm not racist. These things need to be said. All right, so the Gregorian calendar versus sept. Un, deux, trois, quatre, cinq, six, six, cease, stop, the fence, set, wheat, right? Wheat, 8. Okay, neuf, 10, right? Sept, 7, September. In the other calendar, whatever it is, I didn't get that far. September, means clan. It means rising from the ashes and so on. Is what they're getting at. 7, the Virgo, the virgin birth, and I've showed you in the other video. I'm born in September. At great personal risk. Arguably, that's no big deal because I'm being screened out anyway. I showed you who I am, who my family is. I've given you my family, like Jesus gave you his, right? His brother James, his mother, of course, all of them were raped and abused after all was said and done. Okay? Just like in Armageddon, we're not supposed to stand down and give them our kids. Blessed are, the wombs that never bore children, the barren wombs, the childless wombs, right? That we're in that time today. Let me just stop here, and I'll go through the rest of this later. I'm behind schedule. Make a long story short, I'm telling you the truth. I swear on my ancestors, I'm telling you the truth. If I'm some kind of shell, let me burn in hell. If I'm a controlled opposition bitch, let me burn with everything I value most. Let me burn in the worst part of hell. Let me suffer. If I'm a controlled opposition bitch, let me suffer. And if someone clones me or something because they can't get a hold on this, let that clone suffer. You people don't value the soul, so why don't you just play with your clones and leave us real people who move in the spirit to reproduce in a way that's consistent with sacred marriage. Let us love each other. Let us get beyond this stuff. Let us find our place in nature. Let us find peace with the spirit. Let us not defy God. Let us live in the Logos. Let us not be jealous of each other. Let us all breed in a way that creates beautiful people that move in the spirit. Let us be attracted to the spirit first and foremost. And the flesh is important, but the spirit is more important. Let us see through the beast and see him for the prince he is. Let us see beauty. Let us enjoy God's world in its natural form. Stop abusing each other. Stop killing the poor. Stop mistreating political dissent.